Hello, boys and girls. Welcome back. It's another beautiful Monday here in the library, and we are back for another chapter of Dealing with Dragons. I have to say, from reading your work online, I am really enjoying hearing your perspectives on the story and your predictions for what's going to be happening next. And this has been a really fun way to connect with you and to hear from you during this time. So, let's get into chapter number 5. Chapter number 5 is called In Which Cimorene Receives a Formal Call from Her Companions in Dire Captivity. Kazul slept late the following morning, and Cimorene was afraid that she would leave before Cimorene had a chance to ask her about the dragon's after-dinner conversation. To her relief, Kazul called her in as soon as she was thoroughly awake and asked Cimorene to bring in the brushes for cleaning her scales. "What was that crystal your friend mentioned last night?" Cimorene asked as she laid out the brushes. "The one she thought King Tokos could use somehow to find out what the wizards are doing." "The king's crystal," Kazul said. "It's one of the magical objects that belongs to the king of the dragons." "But what does it do? And why did Warog think King Tokos wouldn't want to use it?" "Using the crystal is difficult and tiring, and Tokos is getting old," Kazul replied. "Zareth was right to say that the crystal ought to be used, but it will take more evidence than we have right now to persuade the king of that. As to what it does, the crystal shows things that are happening in other times and places. It's very useful, but it can be very difficult to interpret correctly." "Oh, a crystal ball," Cimorene said, nodding. She tapped Kazul's side, and the dragon bent her elbow so that the scales were easier to reach. "The court wizard at Linderwall had one, but I had to stop my magic lessons before he got a chance to show me how to work it." "The king's crystal is more like a plate, but the principle is the same," Kazul said. "A crystal plate?" Cimorene blinked. "No wonder nobody talks about it much. It just doesn't sound right." Kazul shrugged. "The king's crystal is much more accurate than an ordinary crystal ball, and if crystal plate sounds odd to most people, it means that fewer of them will try to steal it." "Was that what the silver-green dragon meant when he said that if the wizards started wandering through the mountains, you'd lose half your magic in no time? I never heard that wizards stole magic rings and swords and things." "Not magic things," said Kazul. "Magic. Wizards steal magic. That's where their power comes from." "How can a wizard steal magic?" Cimorene said skeptically. She climbed on a stool and began working at the ribs of Kazul's wings. "Wizard staffs absorb magic from whatever happens to be nearby," Kazul said, stretching out her left wing so Cimorene could get at the base. "That's why they're always hanging around places like the Mountains of Mourning and the Enchanted Forest. The more magic there is in an area, the more their staffs can soak up." "What would happen if someone stole a wizard's staff? Would the wizard still be able to use it?" "The wizard wouldn't be able to work any magic until he got back," Kazul said. "Most of them have a great many anti-theft spells on their staff for exactly that reason. Of course, it happens anyways now and then. And as long as the wizard and the staff are separated, the staff doesn't absorb magic." "It doesn't sound like a very good arrangement to me," Cimorene said. "I can think of half a dozen ways a staff could be lost or forgotten or stolen or something. It doesn't seem sensible for a wizard to depend so much on anything that's so easy to misplace." Kazul shrugged. "They seem to like it." "I can see why you don't want them in your part of the mountains." "Can you? Do you have any idea how unpleasant it is to have part of your essence sucked out of you without so much as a by your leave? Not to mention the side effects." "Side effects?" Cimorene said, puzzled. "There, turn around and I'll do your other side." "Roxham isn't the only dragon who's allergic to wizards," Kazul said dryly as she shifted her position. "Or rather, to their staffs. We all are. Roxham's just a little more sensitive than most. That's why we made the agreement with them in the first place." "The dragons have an agreement with the wizards?" Kazul nodded. "To be precise, the king of the dragons has an agreement with the head of the Society of Wizards. The wizards stay out of our portions of the Mountain of Mourning, and we allow them partial access to the Caves of Fire and Night. At least, that's the way it's supposed to work. King Tokos is getting old and forgetful, and lately wizards have been turning up in all sorts of places they aren't supposed to be. Like that wizard Zeminar I met on the path, Cimorene said. Do you think he really was the same Zeminar that's the head of the Society of Wizards? I doubt that anyone, even another wizard, would dare impersonate him, Kazul said. He has a nasty reputation. Cimorene remembered the hard black eyes and sharp features of the wizard she had met. He had certainly looked nasty enough, even when he was pretending to be nice. He was sneaky too, or he wouldn't have tried to kick her. And he had been very annoyed when Cimorene got off the ledge without his help. Cimorene frowned. I wonder what he wanted, really, she mused. Do you suppose he'll stop by the way he said he would? I almost wish he would try, Kazul said. There was an angry glint in her eye, and her claws made a scratching sound against the stone floor of the cave as she flexed them. Don't wiggle, Cimorene said. If Zeminar is as tricky as everyone says, he won't come while you're here. He'll wait till you've gone somewhere and I'm alone. True. Kazul frowned. Then she looked at Cimorene, and her eyes took on a speculative gleam. He probably thinks you're as silly as most princesses, so he'll be hoping to trick you into giving him whatever it is he's after. And if he does, then maybe I can fool him instead, Cimorene finished. And once we know what he's after, we can decide what to do about it. Kazul and Cimorene discussed this idea while Cimorene finished brushing the dragon's scales. There was very little they could do to prepare, since they did not know when Zeminar might show up at the cave or what he might do when he arrived. Then Kazul went off to inspect the ledge where Cimorene had met the wizard to see whether bits of it were still invisible. When Kazul had gone, Cimorene went into the library to hunt through all the books and scrolls of spells. The behavior of the dragons at dinner the previous evening had made a considerable impression on her, and she wanted to see whether she could find a spell to fireproof herself. Until then, she hadn't realized that when a dragon lost his temper, he started breathing fire. Not that she was planning to do anything to irritate Kazul, or any other dragon for that matter, but the dragons at dinner had been too annoyed to be careful, and she didn't want to get burned by accident, no matter how sorry the dragon might be afterward. At first, Cimorene didn't have much luck. She hadn't had time to do much organizing in the library, and most of the books and scrolls were lying in haphazard dust-covered piles. Some had even fallen onto the floor, and there were spiders everywhere. Cimorene realized that if she wanted to find anything, she was going to have to do some more cleaning first. With a sigh, she went to get a bucket of water and some cloths for washing and dusting, and a handkerchief to tie over her hair. She worked for several hours, dusting books and manuscripts, wiping off the dirty bookshelves, and putting the books back in neat rows when the shelves were dry. She found 2 books and 5 old scrolls that looked as if they might be interesting. These she set on one of the tables to look at later. She had just pulled a stained and yellowed stack of papers out of the back of the second-to-last bookshelf when she heard someone hallooing outside. Now what? She muttered crossly. She set the papers on the table with the rest of the books she was planning to look at later and went out to see who was there. To her surprise, the noise was coming from the back entrance, not from the mouth of the cave. She hurried into the passage, rounded the corner, and found herself facing 3 beautiful, elegantly dressed princesses. They were all blonde and blue-eyed and slender and several inches shorter than Cimorene. The first one wore a crown of gold set with diamonds, and her hair was the color of sun-ripened wheat. The second wore a crown of silver set with sapphires, and her hair was the color of crystallized honey. The last wore a pearl-covered circlet, and her hair was the color of ripe apricots. They looked rather taken aback by the sight of Cimorene in her dust-colored dress and kerchief. "Oh, bother," Cimorene said under her breath. Then she smiled her best smile and said, "Welcome to the caves of the dragon Kazul. May I help you with anything?" "We have made the perilous journey through the tunnels to see the Princess Cimorene, newly come to these caverns, to comfort her and together bemoan our sad and sorry fates," the first princess said haughtily. "Tell her we're here." "I'm Cimorene," Cimorene said. "I don't need comforting, and I'm not particularly sad or sorry to be here, but if you'd like to come in and have some tea, you're welcome to." The first two princesses looked as if they would have liked to be startled and appalled by this announcement, but were much too well-bred to show what they were feeling. The third princess, with the pearl circlet, looked surprised and rather intrigued, and she glanced hopefully at her companions. They ignored her, but after a moment the first princess said very grandly, "Very well, we will join you then," and swept past Princess Cimorene into the cave. The other princesses followed, the one with the pearl circlet giving Cimorene a shy smile as she passed. Cimorene, wondering what she had gotten herself into, brought up the rear. The princesses stopped when they reached the main cave, and the ones in gold and silver crowns looked a bit disgusted. The one in the pearl circlet stared in unabashed amazement. "My goodness," she said, "you certainly do have a lot of space." "Alienora," the gold-crowned princess said sharply, and the princess with the pearl circlet flushed and subsided, looking unhappy. "This way," Cimorene said hastily, and led the three princesses into the kitchen. "Do sit down," she said, waving at the bench beside the kitchen table. The gold-crowned princess looked at the bench with distaste, but after a moment she sat down. The other two followed her example. There was a brief silence while Cimorene filled the copper tea kettle and hung it over the fire, and then the gold-crowned princess said, "I have been remiss in my duties, for I have not yet told you who we are. I am the Princess Caradwell of the Kingdom of Raxwell, now captive of the dread dragon Gornal. This," she nodded toward the princess in the silver crown, "is the Princess Helena of the Kingdom of Porenbuth, now captive of the dread dragon Zareth. And this," she waved at the girl in the pearl circlet, "is the Princess Alienora of the Duchy of Tour-on-Marche, now prisoner of the dread dragon Warog." "Pleased to meet you," Cimorene said. "I am Princess Cimorene of the Kingdom of Linderwall, now Princess of the Dragon Kazul. What sort of tea would you like? I have blackberry, ginger, chamomile, and gunpowder green. I'm afraid I used the last of the Lapsang Souchong this morning." "Blackberry, please," Caradwell said. She gave Cimorene a considering look. "You seem to be most philosophic about your fate." "Would that I had such a valiant spirit," Helena said in failing accents. "But my sensibility is too great, I fear, for me to follow your example." "If you don't like being a dragon's princess, why don't you escape?" Cimorene said, remembering that Kazul had said that 3 princesses in a row had run away from the yellow-green dragon Morans. Caradwell and Helena looked shocked. "Without being rescued?" Helena faltered. "Walk all that way with dragons and trolls and goodness knows what else, hiding in the rocks ready to eat me? Oh, I couldn't!" "It isn't done," Caradwell said coldly, "and I notice that you haven't tried it." "But I'm enjoying being Kazul's princess," Cimorene said cheerfully. "I suppose I might have been upset if I'd been carried off the way you were, but I can hardly complain as it is, can I?" Alienora leaned forward. "Then you really did volunteer to be Kazul's princess?" Caradwell and Helena turned and stared at their companion. "Where did you get that ridiculous idea, Alienora?" Helena asked. Warog said," Alienora faltered. "You must have misunderstood," Caradwell said severely. "No one volunteers to be a dragon's princess. It isn't done." "Actually, Alienora's quite right," Cimorene said as she set the teacups in front of her visitors. "I did volunteer." She smiled sweetly at the thunderstruck expressions on the faces of the first 2 princesses. "I got tired of embroidery and etiquette." Caradwell and Helena seemed unsure of how to take this announcement, so they made polite conversation about the tea and asked Cimorene questions about the current fashions. Alienora didn't say very much, and the few times she tried, either Caradwell or Helena jumped on her. Cimorene felt rather sorry for Alienora. The princesses swept off at last, still somewhat puzzled by Cimorene's attitude. Cimorene gave a sigh of relief and set about cleaning up the kitchen. She was just rinsing off the last of the cups when she heard someone hesitantly clearing her throat behind her. Cimorene turned and saw Alienora standing timidly in the doorway. "Hello again," Cimorene said. "Did you forget something?" "Not exactly," Alienora said. "I mean, I told Caradwell I did, but actually I just wanted to get away from them for a while. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind as long as you don't expect more hospitality, Cimorene assured her. I have to get back to work on the library. What are you doing? Alienora asked. She seemed really interested, so Cimorene explained about the fireproofing spell. It sounds like a wonderful idea, Alienora said when Cimorene finished. The dragons are careful around us, but it would be nice not to have to depend on them not to lose their tempers. She hesitated. May I help? I don't think Kazul would mind, Cimorene said, but you'd better change clothes first. The library isn't very clean, I'm afraid. Alienora looked down at her silk gown, which was embroidered heavily with silver and pearls, and giggled. Cimorene took her into the bedroom and found a plain, serviceable cleaning dress in the magic wardrobe. It took her 2 tries before the wardrobe figured out that she wanted a dress for someone else, but once it caught on, it provided a splendid selection in Alienora's size. Then they went to the library and got to work. And we're going to stop there in this chapter, actually, because that's a good length for now. So we'll pick up in this chapter next time, and we'll see what Cimorene and Alienora get up to in the library. Until then, take care. I miss you all very much, and I can't wait to see you again soon. And I will see you Wednesday for the next chapter.